In this session, we're going to take some time and talk about some of the things to consider as you develop a vision for the future, whether that vision be to remodel or to repurpose, or whether it be to build new. All of those opportunities exist, and they become stronger at different points of time along the path. So let's talk about that. This 80% rule, which we have said here is a tried and true ratio, may be changing for the first time in a long time. Instead of a space being effectively full when you reach 80%, that number may be coming down now because people's perceptions of the way that space is used and the way that they are in proximity to one another may be challenged. So we may need to think about this in a very different way. So we'll know more about how people's perceptions over the long haul are going to change when it comes to proximity. I think it's still a little bit too early to tell for sure how this is going to affect the gathering together of people in a large group space. So what do we do? What's next? We've hit our boundary, whether it be 80% or 60% or whatever it is. What do we do now as we begin to approach what we consider to be a full level of capacity? Do we remodel? Do we repurpose? Do we rebuild? What are the opportunities in each of those areas? And of course, that's going to be affected strongly by our particular location, the economy at the time, a number of other factors. When you think about remodeling, it's very important to really understand whether or not you've taken full advantage of the facilities that you currently are using. You know, sometimes we get a little bit stuck in our own patterns of thinking about the way things can be used, and it is very helpful to bring in somebody from the outside to be able to do an analysis to understand, are they being used effectively? That goes not only for the building, but it also goes for the site as well. Or do we go to a repurposing? This particular project that you're seeing on the screen used to be a Lowe's store. The ministry organization was able to come in and do a purchase on this building for pennies on the dollar, avoiding a myriad of costs that would have affected both in the site and the building. Took on 150,000 square feet of space and have been able to make a conversion by repurposing the space for their ministry group. So really understanding what are the facilities that are available in your area for that sort of thing, and can we take advantage of that? Of course, that's strongly affected by the economics of the time period that we're talking about. 10 or 12 years ago, there were a number of projects that became available, and then we went into a long period of time when those projects were not so readily available. So this particular project you're seeing on the screen right now was an old Coca-Cola bottling plant that was converted to a large gathering space for events and for a worship service to occur in that space. In fact, I happen to be standing in it today giving this presentation, but it was a reconditioned space. This project was something that we found to be a very common approach 10 or 11 years ago when car dealerships became very available at greatly reduced costs. This was a car dealership that was turned into the Waypoint Church back in Michigan. And that suddenly there was a lot of opportunities for that sort of thing to happen. Repurposing, that's going to be important. So at the same time we're thinking about repurposing, we're thinking about location. Location is going to be key. Sometimes we have this tendency to go in and find a really nice building that we get enamored with, but we tend to overlook the fact that it's in a part of the city that maybe doesn't have good connection to the people in the city that we're trying to reach. So understanding location is going to be key. The nice thing, by the way, about car dealerships is car dealerships want to be in locations where the people are. They want to be where the traffic is, where the visibility is. And so car dealerships have a tendency to be in really good locations with large amounts of open space, good parking, and they make terrific locations for ministry organizations. It's important for us, too, to really understand what the zoning issues are on a given piece of land when we're considering repurposing. Does the zoning allow for us to go into a location and make a new use out of that? Or are we going to go through so much uphill climb with the local jurisdiction that we're not really going to be able to feasibly make the transition from whatever the previous purpose is to the new ministry purpose? It's important to consider what the city is going to be saying about these kinds of things, city or county, to make sure that we are in good coordination. So oftentimes when a repurposing opportunity comes along, we will afford ourselves a period of time that we would call a due diligence period of time, where prior to putting a lot of money down on that purchase, that we make sure that we have really consulted with all the individuals in the city that are going to play a role in the ultimate decision of whether this is a good feature to be added into that particular part of the city. Zoning is very important. Parking is very important. If we go into a situation where we get a really great situation as far as the building is concerned, but we don't have adequate parking, that it can be a real hindrance to you, and that becomes the limiting factor as to the way that you're going to be using that facility. So sometimes that can be solved by adjacent parking, that we can work some parking deals out with. Cities are more open to that these days. Instead of creating a lot of parking that sits vacant most of the time, can we make use of shared parking? And sometimes those opportunities exist for us as well. Understanding, too, what the utility situation would be. A lot of times, particularly in older buildings, the utilities that service that building may not be adequate for the new purpose that we're intending for it. So really understanding what the situation is with sanitary sewer and electrical lines that are coming into the building, what the water line is. We may find that in a repurposed building, we need to go in and add a sprinkler system because of the large group aspect of the building. If we need to add a sprinkler system in, it's going to be very difficult to do in a small water line size. So we need to make sure that water is available in the local area, or we're going to pay a real premium to add those fire sprinklers into a project. So understanding the utilities is crucially important. Understanding the nature of expandability to the facility. Sometimes we can take on projects, a repurpose project or a rebuild project, that is a great building in and of itself, but if we try to expand that, the structural systems of the building don't accommodate that very easily. So understanding how can we morph and change as time goes on. If the ministry grows, which direction are we going to go? Having a plan in mind, a master plan for the expandability of that new repurposed property is going to be very important. That comes down to structural systems, so we really need to understand what the structure is. And sometimes when we go into an older facility, it's not very apparent. This particular slide, it is very apparent. You can walk in and you can see exactly what's going on. But understanding the structure of the building is going to be important. Sometimes, too, when we go in and we change the use of the building, we go from, say, a car dealership to a church, or we go from one use to another use for a ministry organization, the code officials have the ability to come in and ask you to upgrade to all the current codes. And when we go into situations where maybe the seismic requirements have shifted, or maybe we go into a situation where the wind loading has become more severe as hurricane codes have changed, that we really need to understand what the limitations of the existing structural system are posing to the project. Are we going to need to go in and add bracing to the project where it didn't previously exist? And if we need to add bracing, like you see in this particular slide, what are the impacts to the function of the building? Important for us to understand ceiling heights too. A lot of times we'll get involved in projects where maybe they want to include a large worship center for a lot of people that frankly just you don't have the ceiling height to make the room proportionately feel right. Ceiling height is very important to consider. We got involved in that project I was telling you a few minutes ago about the Lowe's store. Well, we actually had to take the roof and lift the roof about 7 feet in order for that room to be able to be legitimately used as a worship center for 1,800 people. Sometimes it's just a matter of not just the way the room feels, but in this particular room we had ascending seats going up a slope, and by the time we got up to the upper portions of the seats, we were just flat out of space for people to be able to walk back there, so we had to lift it up. There's good ways of doing that today that are efficient and can be employed to be able to make good use of the structure. Thinking too about HVAC systems, again, codes have changed, and when you're introducing, maybe it was previously, we'll use the example again of a car dealership. When a car dealership is fully employed with all the people that are normal to a car dealership, it may represent 10% of what's going to be in there for a ministry organization. And when you put that many more people into a building and you're trying to rely on an HVAC system that was designed around a group of people that may be far smaller than what you're putting in the building, you're going to run into problems. So we need to think about the way that the HVAC systems are going to be employed. Thinking about accessibility issues, we talk about ADA guidelines. The reality of it is most ministry organizations are exempt from the ADA, but they're almost self-governing. If the International Building Code will layer in there and cause us to have to address these issues, but churches and ministry organizations are filled with people who have special needs. So we need to examine the building to make sure that people can navigate the building properly. When they go into the restroom, can they use the restroom that meets their needs? Are there facilities in there that really attend to the needs of people in wheelchairs or walkers? What can we do to upgrade? What do we need to do to upgrade? Very important to today's world is thinking about security. How do we make the building secure? There's several layers that need to be considered here. Obviously, we know about some of the news stories that are out there about churches coming under attack from somebody who maybe has had a problem with a particular specific church or church in general. But how do we attend to those things? Some of that can be attended to through the use of visuals like camera systems and so forth, and posting people around in certain locations, but also in the way that the building is laid out. That certainly has to do with the way that we check our kids in and out, making sure. Families today care about security. That's a given. They want to know that, have we accommodated that? Acoustics are going to be very important too. One of the three most important measures of the success of a large group gathering space, beyond sight lines and the comfort level of the chairs, is the acoustics of the room, is can they hear? And oftentimes ministry organizations have not just music in its varying forms, but they also have to be clear for the spoken word. So attending to acoustical needs in a given space, in an existing space, can sometimes be a challenge. But if you think about it ahead of time, we can really solve these problems before they become issues. So one of the things that, if we find that it makes more sense to rebuild or to build fresh, one of the things we really want to be thinking about is understanding various aspects of a new site. We want to understand what the demographic information is of the local area. You know, are we going to be in the midst of a good population of people that can be attracted into this facility that are in close proximity, or are we on the outskirts of things? Are we devoid of a population of people and everybody's going to have to drive to a special location? So as we mentioned in the earlier parts of this discussion, getting the site understood really clearly from a location standpoint is going to be crucial. Understanding the issues concerning visibility. For a long time as an architect, I knew that sites that tend to be lower than the street are oftentimes, the buildings are not noticed. Even a few feet makes a big difference. Bringing and giving the building some stature on the site, bringing it up off of the land so that people can see it is very important. Don't put your building in a hole, making sure that people can see it. If you do have a site that has those challenges, what are some of the things that we can do to bring visibility? Maybe it's a higher element of the building that brings some notification to people traveling by that there's something unique going on here. So bringing a special element that rises up out of the site can be a real aid to that. Understanding what access is like, making sure that we've got good points of access and good points of egress so people can get into the site and get off of the site without long lines and frustration to the people that are coming in. Making sure, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, that there are utilities in close proximity. An enormous amount of money from a budget can be spent just getting the utilities to the site. Again, we talked a little bit about zoning. Topography can play a major role in the way that we develop a site. It can be a very costly, problematic issue to a site, so understanding where the best place on a site to place the building to limit the effects of topography. Or maybe there's some positive aspects. Maybe we need to think about placement of a building in terms of its visibility and using topography to our advantage. And then ultimately, too, we want to think about geotechnical issues. What's happening below the earth? Are we going to spend an enormous amount of money making a site viable because of compressible soil materials or expansive soil materials? So really get into that during the due diligence period and really understanding what some of those issues are going to be. As we think about sites, there are a number of different criteria that we want to be thinking about in terms of the site. Sometimes we use rules of thumb like parking. You can typically park between 100 and 120 people per acre of land. That counts in the aisles, it counts in some of the landscaping things that we need to do internal to a parking lot. We need to make sure that we're thinking about getting the proper number of parking stalls. Churches vary in this area a little bit. Sometimes we need to provide one parking stall for every 1.75 seats in the worship area. Sometimes that number can climb up to 1 to 3. So understanding the demographics of a particular ministry organization and how that pertains to parking is going to be critically important. Inside the building, inside the worship area, making sure that we've provided enough space between seats. And by the way, that's grown over time. 100 years ago, people were sitting 18 inches on center with no problem. Their bodies were just smaller. We've morphed over time. Our bodies have become larger, and the space that we need from seat to seat has increased. We've gone from 18 inches to 19 inches to 21 inches. Nowadays, we design anywhere from 21 to 24 inches. I would imagine that somewhere we're going to adjust that number again. And so we need to think about, are we providing enough space so that people don't feel crunched when they get into their building? That whole notion, though, of visibility is going to be crucial. Visibility is important because it really is a first impression to the building. Even before they begin to meet people, and all of a sudden maybe the relationship side takes over beyond the externals of what does the building look like, can I see inside. The front facade of the building has become a very important factor. So really understanding what are some of the things that we can do to convey information. Making sure that we have some glass on the front of the building is going to be very important. So allow people to see into your building. People can see in, people can see out. As we get into this too, thinking about the whole notion of building using a phased approach towards the development of a particular site. It is not uncommon for us to go into a situation and the needs may be extensive, but the budget doesn't quite allow us to meet all those needs. But planning in the very beginning to make sure that we have accommodated those future needs as the budget becomes available, to make sure that there's a strategy in place that allows us to move along instead of in a haphazard way. We have a planned approach towards phasing the building and allowing this to be done in an organized way.